Welcome back to another episode of Menopause Reimagined. Today, we're going to be talking about a molecule called NAD+, and its role when it comes to aging, cellular health, energy, as well as brain fog and sleep. So you're not going to want to miss today's episode. Before I bring in our guest, I want to just do a quick intro to who I am. My name is Andrea Donsky. I'm a nutritionist for 20 years. I'm a menopause educator and published menopause researcher, and I'm also the co-founder of wearemorphus.com, a company that helps to empower you to take control of your health and symptoms with nutrition, lifestyle, supplements, and research. Today I'm speaking with Gregory Kelly. He's the VP of Product Development at Qualia Life, a naturopathic physician and author of the book Shapeshift. He was the editor of the journal Alternative Medicine Review and has been an instructor at the University of Bridgeport in the College of Naturopathic Medicine, where he taught classes in advanced clinical nutrition, counseling skills, and doctor-patient relationships. Dr. Kelly has published hundreds of articles on natural medicine and nutrition, contributed 3 chapters to the textbook of natural medicine, and has more than 30 journal articles indexed on PubMed. His area of expertise include nootropics, anti-aging and regenerative medicine, weight management, sleep, and the chronobiology of performance and health. Now, here's Dr. Greg Kelly. Welcome back to Menopause Reimagined, Greg.
Well, thanks for having me again.
I'm happy to have you. Last time we did the podcast, we had a lot of questions about Qualia and, I thought it would be great because you have so many different products at the company. And this time I wanted to talk about something called NAD plus. And I've heard so much about it. I've heard a lot about like on social media, people are talking about it, cellular health. So I thought it would be great to have you on so you can answer some questions. So let's start there. What is NAD plus and why is it good for us?
Yeah, so going way back to my biochemistry class that I've taken 1993 or so, the roles of NAD that I would have learned about historically were basically in 2 big categories. One is think of NAD toggling between the plus sign and an H, NAD plus, NADH, like that, those 2 molecules. They flip back and forth, but they do that to carry the stored electrons in food so that they can be turned into energy in our mitochondria. So that mitochondria making energy is one of its 2 classic roles. And the other one, you'll maybe, like if you looked really hard, you'd see there's something called NADP and NADPH.
Okay.
And it means there's now like a phosphorus also added onto the molecule. And when that happens, it's more about things like that glutathione and cellular protection and making bigger molecules. So those with the like NAD plus molecule can go in that energy direction. It can go in that cellular protection building molecule thing. And then I don't know if it was the late 90s or early 2000s, but it was kind of basically a third category of things that I didn't learn about in biochemistry in the early 90s that started to be explored for NAD plus specifically, not these other variants of it. And they're usually thought of as consumption roles. And what that means is the NAD plus molecule is literally broken apart to fuel something inside a cell. And these are things like DNA repair or enzymes called sirtuins, which some listeners
I've heard of
may.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like sirtuins are really like a cellular stress, like a metabolic
Oh,
stress,
okay, okay,
and they've been tied to longevity
okay.
because of work David Sinclair did historically. And then
You hear that a lot in like the biohacking world.
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
And so that category of basically the molecule being consumed and broken into little pieces to fuel these important enzymes that have to do with repairing DNA and cellular stress responses and nutrient sensing is why all of a sudden, somewhere by the early 2000s, NAD plus started to gain a lot of buzz.
okay.
So think of those 3 things: energy, cellular protection, and then longevity.
So what is it? It's like a molecule, like if you were to break it down to explain exactly what NAD plus is.
Yeah, so it's a molecule, ATP, another one. It would be like ATP1 that I think of as a hub molecule, meaning that a lot of cellular functions hub in that area. So when I think of hub, think of like airports. So
Okay.
I live in San Diego. If I want to go, to Boston, I can luckily do a direct flight. But if I want to go to some other places in the world, I have to go through, Chicago or Dallas or
Denver.
some, yeah, like a big hub, right?
Yeah.
And there's certain molecules that are kind of hubs for our cellular metabolism.
Okay.
Like
And
just a lot passes through them. ATP is one, right? But NAD would be another.
okay. And ATP is what gives the cells energy, right?
ATP is all about, yeah, speeding up enzyme reactions so that work can happen at the appropriate pace for living systems. Without ATP, life doesn't happen. And without NAD, we can't make ATP. So that's, classically it's thought of as its biggest role.
I like to just understand it because this gets a little bit over my head. I find like
Ah.
sometimes when we're talking about like the chemistry and all that information. That's why I want to try to simplify it for me and for our listeners, because otherwise it's like kind of I feel like okay, not really understanding. But now I get it. So NAD plus is important for lots of things, including for ATP in the cells. And so why do we want to take NAD plus as a supplement? Like, it declines as we age? Like, what happens? Like, like, I guess like anything, as we age or go into perimenopause and menopause, I'm assuming it goes down.
Yeah. So NAD plus levels go down progressively
Okay.
with age. Like you can almost think of like a decade by decade, like gradual sloping
Like so
lower. Yeah, and then like one of the interesting studies I saw was in looked actually at three groups. They measured NAD plus levels in sprinters, in long distance runners, and then in sedentary people. And all three groups, the amount went down each decade. But like the good news is sprinters maintained higher levels than even the long distance runners, and long distance runners were higher than sedentary. So exercise had some benefits, but it wasn't sufficient
Right.
to prevent the decline with aging. It just kept our levels higher than if we were, less healthy. So
Okay.
there's like as backup, usually the way NAD plus is measured in studies and the way that we've done it is a finger stick test kit.
Okay.
It's not a common thing that you'd get on like a lab work if you went to Quest or LabCorp, your doctor. And I know I've had mine done a few times just as part of our science and testing our
Fair.
products. And one of the labs we work with sets their optimum ranges based on what they would see in the healthiest men and women that would be university age, early
Okay.
20s.
Okay.
And then, has different categorized. So that would be the optimal level. Mine end up showing up. I I know they're in the orange range if I don't supplement.
Here's the interesting thing too, is like they're saying optimum or optimal range for males in their 20s. Like then I'm like,
Male and females.
male and female. Sorry, I thought it was just males. So, but what are the optimal ranges for someone in their 40s or 50s? Like, do they do that kind of testing?
No, and usually the way optimal ranges, or let's just say like normal ranges, not never mind optimal, because
Right.
on lab tests are done where a lab measures, they're getting results on thousands and thousands of people, and they're looking at the variance and then coming up with normal based off that.
Okay.
And that's why a lot of times, functional medicine doctors or naturopaths or biohackers will say, oh, well, the optimal range for this is even narrower than the normal range on your blood work, right? They're saying like this is needs to be dialed in even more. And for things like NAD plus that have really only been measured in university studies or, these finger stick kits that have only been available for a few years, there's just not population data. What we know about the population is our levels go down. And in general, what they've found, and often things start in animal studies, is if things are done for animals, male and female animals, to allow their NAD levels to be more like they would have been when they were young, good things happen for metabolic health, healthy aging, things like that.
Hmm. So how would we know? I mean, obviously our NAD plus stores or levels are going down as we age, but how would we notice that? Like, are there any signs or symptoms that we would experience that would say, oh, yes, probably like this is affecting me more than I thought it did or more than I knew it would?
Yeah, so the N in NAD plus stands for nicotinamide, which has in a vitamin world, that's like one niacin, right? Is the um, so and there's two forms of niacin. There's the flushing one, which is nicotinic acid, and then there's niacinamide, sometimes also called nicotinamide.
Oh,
And those are the end. Like those can be made into it. And in the early 20th century, because of a variety of things, vitamin B3 deficiency was fairly common, especially in the southeast part of the US.
okay.
And so they did a lot of work, like the science of vitamins isn't super old. A lot of the vitamins were discovered in like the late 20s through like say the early 1940s. And the B3s were in that. And the classic thing for a vitamin B3 deficiency are thought of as the 4Ds. So these would be extreme levels of not getting enough NAD. One of them is dementia, but not in the way we currently use it with like age-related memory loss. Dementia back then was more like a collection of just think of brain foggy types of
Mm,
things, right? Like
okay.
lacking mental clarity, focus, issues with mood. So that would
Like
be one of the
for
D.
us in perimenopause and menopause, it's the number two
Yeah,
common symptom. So,
yeah. Another would be diarrhea. So it really affected the gut and the gut microbiome. And the third was a specific kind of dermatitis, so like a skin inflammation, skin irritation. So those were the three clusterings of symptoms you would see, like brain symptoms, skin health symptoms, GI symptoms. And then the fourth D was death if it wasn't eventually corrected.
yeah.
So what you would normally see is that people aren't that degree in the modern world of deficient in the NAD precursors, but you often would see one or more of those things as suggested things. Now, granted, lots of things can cause those, right? They're non-specific, but those, the single biggest thing I hear from people that supplement to boost NAD levels is usually energy, like just a sense of like
Number one,
overcoming
number one most
fatigue.
common
Yeah,
symptom. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Interesting. So energy. I guess because it makes sense because it's at the cell you were just saying before, it works at the cellular level and it helps with ATP. Well, that makes sense, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You don't have that energy. And so are there any myths around taking NAD plus? Like, can we take too much? Can you like I would love to you to go into a little bit around that. So like obviously we're talking about taking NAD plus as a supplement. Like, yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, my general rule of thumb is that most things have a Goldilocks, right? Like there's too little, there's too much, there's a just right amount. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that's like a prudent way to think about almost everything. It's super common in the biohacker space, but even in the, in our world in general, for people to think more is always better. And I would
I'm with you on that, by the way.
yeah, I would just, advise listeners to get away from thinking of that. Like, so that lab I mentioned that's done a lot of NAD testing actually does have like an optimal range. And then above that, they would think of as maybe too much. Um, I've not seen anyone supplementing like Qualia NAD as an example get above the optimal range.
That's
But
good.
if you took really high amounts of NAD boosters, you could get there. So I think it's important to do just the right amount of supplement, right? So we recommend 2 capsules a day of Qualia. If for like a week, 2 weeks, someone wanted to double that, I would be fine. But doing, 2 or 3 times that amount over long periods, I would say no. You're just now going to stress other things and go back to that like airline and hub analogy, right? So what I think can happen with like biochemistry is complicated and these things are networks of things. So there's something called the NAD metabolome, but just think of that as all the airports that have an N molecule somewhere in them, right? NAD plus, NADH, NADP, NMN, you name it. And I think what can happen is if you over push one, you end up stranding passengers in other airports, so to speak.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm not a more is better person, especially when it comes to supplements. Like, follow the directions on the label. And, if you go on Amazon, you'll see so many, or not necessarily Amazon or anywhere where you see marketing for supplements. Like, you'll see there's so much of like, okay, at ours, it has the most, and it has like, but it's not even so much about the most in terms of like the amount you're getting. It's like, well, what does the science say? Like, what is the actual research? Like, how much are you taking an efficacious dose? And don't take more than what's on the label. Like, please follow what's on the label because the companies are like, for example, Qualia, you say take 2 capsules. That's what's according, I'm guessing, according to the research, right? Like, talk a little bit about the research behind the NAD plus.
Yeah, so we've done some of our own studies, and that amount, I think it's safe. Like in general, the most research has been on the older B3s, like the flushing niacin, the niacinamide. There's now newer research on what I think of as the new generation of
Yeah.
NAD boosters, your nicotinamide riboside or NR or NMNs. And in those studies, they'll generally the original studies for NR and NMN often did like a lower dose and a higher dose. And then the higher dose will boost NAD plus levels more, at least over the first 4 weeks. But in one of those early studies, there was some adaptation that started to look like it was happening by the end of 2 months. And we'll talk about it later. You had asked before we started recording about methylation. And one of the ways that our body eliminates excess of anything that makes the NAD molecule is by methylating the excess, because that's what allows it to turn it into something that we can eliminate through urine. So
Mm,
what would happen if we take more and more or chasing higher and higher NAD plus levels, we may get, marginally higher, but we're going to now tax that methylation pathway more and more as
mm.
well.
Yeah, that's why I'm like follow the directions on the label. So you mentioned boosters. Like, can you explain what that means?
Yeah, yeah. So NAD plus is a big molecule in a relative sense. And
Okay.
by that I mean it's hard to get things inside of our cells. Right? Like it would seem simple, right? Like we take this orally, it goes up in the blood. Of course it's going to go up in cells, but that's not it's not as straightforward as that.
Okay.
And NAD plus, as in functional medicine, addiction treatments, has been given as an IV going back decades. And the reason they give it that way is because NAD, if you take the whole molecule, NAD plus orally, enzymes in our saliva start to break it down, and then in our gut break it down. It breaks it down into the little pieces, the N molecule, the A molecule, the D, like these are all like their own separate molecules. And then, those smaller molecules are what get absorbed, make it into circulation, and eventually get reassembled in our cells.
Mm.
So, um, I think I lost track of where your question was, but the idea of the boosters are these are the building blocks
Okay.
that we can make NAD from. And they're what we could take NAD, but we're just going to break it down into the boosters anyways. So let's just go with the boosters that we know work when we take
Okay.
them orally to make NAD levels go up inside of our cells.
So that would probably lead me to a good question is like, what are the ingredients in Qualia's NAD plus?
Yeah, so there's I mentioned there's like the old, NAD boosters that you're flushing niacin,
Yeah.
niacinamide, and the new ones, nicotinamide riboside and NMN. So, and what turns out is certain tissues prefer one versus another to
Okay.
make NAD. So, if I'm remembering correctly, kidneys, as an example, have a preference for using the flushing niacin to make
Okay.
NAD. Other tissues, maybe the old niacinamide. Others in the gut microbiome, NR works slightly differently than niacinamide. And so, what we do at Qualia is we create a portfolio of the different NAD boosters because our assumption is if cells and tissues have preferences for some, versus others, let's give them all of them.
Oh, I see.
So
Okay.
that's one category. And then to turn those building blocks actually into NAD in cells takes cellular work. So we talked about that. And one of the things I found super interesting when I was, like nerding out on the biochemistry, which is I don't expect the listeners to care about, but every step I mentioned this idea of airports, right? To get any precursor molecule that can build NAD to the next step in the of its journey, trying to get to the NAD plus molecule, always required ATP,
Hmm.
always. And I mentioned earlier that NAD is important for making ATP, but they're both equally important for making each other. And so one of the things I find always super interesting is, we hear a lot about ATP and mitochondria in the biohacking world, especially. Um, do you know what mineral is always bound to ATP for it to be active?
I'm going to guess magnesium.
You got it.
Oh, really?
So,
Oh, that's only
yeah.
because I know how amazing magnesium is, so I'm guessing. Oh, good. Yay.
Yeah. So for listeners, whenever you hear ATP, always think magnesium.
Well, it actually
First,
makes sense because I know magnesium helps to give you energy. Like when you're taking it during the day, it helps with energy. So it actually makes sense.
yeah, yeah. So magnesium plays a whole bunch of roles that tie in with energy. Like that's the first, that for ATP to be active, it's always complexed with magnesium. A second is magnesium's crazy important to turn sugars into ATP, to break them down. I think that like breakdown pathway of sugars might have 8 or 9 enzymes, and 5 of them need magnesium.
Hmm.
Um, and about a third of our magnesium in the body is actually stored inside mitochondria, where ATP is made. So that would be another thing you'd see in Qualia NAD plus is you'll see magnesium. Super common deficiency, crazy important for making flow through this complicated group of molecules work well.
I'm the biggest fan of magnesium, so I love that.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you have the magnesium, so you have the B3.
Yeah, the different NAD, the NR, the other different boosters. And then again, going back to that role of ATP, moving things through this like complicated airport system, we supply about 20 to 25% of all of the other B complex, because all of the B family is involved in making ATP, like
Awesome.
all of them, right? And so, think of Qualia NAD plus as a B complex on steroids for making the NAD plus molecule, but it's got lesser amounts of all the B vitamins.
Okay, let's talk about B vitamins for a minute
Yeah.
because I know that they're super crucial for so many different things. And like in terms of what they're helpful for in general, but also why should our listeners who are in perimenopause and menopause want to take a B complex on steroids?
Yeah, so like first and foremost, Qualia NAD plus is about making, more NAD plus, right? That's the main thing we've studied. But to be able to make that efficiently and make sure that passengers aren't stuck in the San Diego airport, we need ATP, and all of the B complex vitamins have either direct or indirect roles in making um,
Right.
turning food basically into ATP. The other big area that B vitamins are super important is for making neurotransmitters. Your dopamines, as an example. And so the the group of B vitamins super important. Like B6, you'd hear a lot about, for like PMS symptoms. Like yeah, I think if you went to Sprouts or Whole Foods, a lot of those you'll see high amounts of B6 as an example. B6 is super important in the serotonin pathway, making melatonin, other ones in making dopamine. So B's show up a lot in cognition, which we've got another product called Qualia Mind. We've got the full B stack in just, again, not crazy high amounts, but you always want to make sure the Bs are supported if you're thinking about cognition. Melatonin, I mentioned, right? Like, so menopause, sleep issues, super
Oh, I'm
common,
a huge
right?
fan.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, Greg, is it something, and also like you were saying, neurotransmitters, mood. I mean, I notice
absolutely.
it's like I notice if I don't take my B's, mood is like it's a different story. So it's very important for mood as well. So energy, mood, like all the different things you're saying. So
Oh, one more before we move
yeah,
off Bs,
go ahead.
stress. So
Yeah.
like a lot
Hello.
of old, some of the old vitamin work, and stress is hypothalamus, which is the brain, pituitary in the brain, adrenal, like especially the adrenal. A lot of old research, B1 and B5, especially crazy important for allowing the adrenals to respond well to stress.
And when we're stressed, we deplete the B's. So
Yeah.
very
We
important.
also, we also, there's something called the magnesium stress vicious cycle.
Oh,
So
yeah.
for some, I don't know that anyone knows why, but when we're stressed, our cells push magnesium from the inside into outside. which is just how part of how they deal with stress, like no biggie. But if stress is sustained, then we end up wasting magnesium, right? Which and then that makes cells less resilient to handle stress in the future, which is why they
It makes
call
us
it
more
that vicious
stressed.
cycle. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it makes us more stressed. Yeah, exactly. So I know that you were instrumental in formulating NAD plus, Qualia's NAD plus. Can you talk about what led you, what inspired you to formulate? Because I have products that I formulate, so I know like it's such a passionate thing. So talk a little bit about, your inspiration behind NAD plus.
Um, so we like going back, our original product was just called Qualia back then in 2017. Now it would be Qualia Mind. And I joined Neurohacker. It'll be actually 7 years. I'm sure by the time this comes out, because it'll be May 7th is my anniversary date of joining Qualia. And at the time, that's all we had. We had that nootropic. And then the product that we made next is now called Qualia Mitochondria Plus.
Okay.
And at the time, that product, we wanted it to do um, a lot of things. We wanted it to help cells take in more blood sugar so they could turn that into ATP. We wanted it to make more ATP. We wanted it to support making more NAD plus as well, right? Because that's a hub for energy metabolism. And we wanted to activate a whole bunch of what would be thought as mitochondrial biogenesis, like helping support mitochondria make newer, fitter, more mitochondria, right? So, like going back even 7 years ago when I first joined Qualia, that Mitochondria Plus has an NAD plus stack in it. So it's been, you might say, like a passion of Qualia's, really since our, second product. And then what we decided for this one, Qualia NAD Plus, is that we would just really more narrowly focus on that and do an even better job at helping make NAD Plus.
Hmm. And I know that you've been taking it. Can you talk a little bit about your own personal experience? I always like to say the N of one, or I just recently learned me search. I thought that was I was like, oh my God, that is such a good term, me search, in terms of using the product. Qualia.
Yeah, I haven't heard that. I'll use that in
Isn't
the
that
future.
great? I was like, oh my God, that's so like me. Yeah, me search. I loved it.
Yeah, so my first and one. So for listeners, I am in charge of product development, at Qualia. So invariably, I take the first prototypes. We always make something up in our lab, and then, a few of us will take it. And so at the time, I actually decided to measure my before and after NAD levels using that finger stick test kit, and took the first prototype for 23 days. And I took it first thing in the morning for listeners. I literally, like when I had my, like hydration first thing in the morning, I would take two
Take it.
capsules. And my
Which makes
levels,
sense. You want the energy benefit, so it makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, and my NAD plus levels went up about 150%
Oh, wow.
over that 3 years. So that I would think of that as a super responder, meaning like mine were much more than what on average we've seen with Qualia NAD
Why do
plus.
you think that is?
We're all so different,
Mm.
right?
Just
Like
the way
I generally group people into 4 groups for anything. This could be exercise, could be red light therapy, it could be you name it, supplements. That there's going to be a subset of people that are super responders.
Mm.
Like think of, like exercise and some, men or women, they'll start an exercise routine and 6 months later they're just completely transformed, right? Right. And then, um, you know, the next group, responders, will have done the same thing, but not got such a dramatic change, right? Like something good happened, but not that
As
extreme.
extreme. Yeah.
Yeah. And then for most things, there's non-responders, right? There's people that will do something and it just doesn't, like didn't work with them, right? Maybe diet's classic, right? Like it's one of the reasons that people argue about different diets because some people are super responders to one and non-responders to another, right? It's just the nature of it. And then there can be negative responders, right? People that not only did it not work, but it caused some like problem.
Yeah.
So I generally think of most things in that framework. And what I look for when we do a product at Qualia is can we get a lot of super responders and can we eliminate the negative responders? And if that's the case, then net this is a good product for the world.
Right.
And so I would have been in that super responder, but why? I don't know. Oh, right. Like, but there's just different, people that super respond to different things is what it boils down to.
So what did you say? So what would you say? So how did you feel? Like what were some
Yeah,
positive
yeah,
aspects
I would say
or
that the
negative
things
aspects?
that I would feel are the most common things I hear. So, for listeners, I'm in my early 60s now, but I'm unusual in that I sleep really well. Um, and I don't think that there's anything special that I do other than for many years I've thought sleep was important, and whatever part of Greg's brain, really runs sleep, got that message a long time ago. And it's like, oh, we're tired, we'll go to sleep, we'll sleep through the night and we're good. So I don't get up to urinate. I
Yeah.
go to bed when I'm sleepy. I wake up sometime, usually 6 to 8 hours later. Um,
Right.
so sleep's a big thing I hear. I didn't experience sleep, but what I would have been like recovery from workouts, feeling better and more energy during the day. And those are the most common two I hear, in addition to like something in the sleep sense.
Yeah.
Like often people feeling like they they get more restoration for the amount
Mm,
of sleep they're getting.
mm. I love it. Is there anything else that you would want to share with our audience? Actually, I do want to ask you, you're right about the methylation before we go. If somebody doesn't methylate well, how does that affect them?
Yeah, so let's get to that. But before, we'll just answer one other thing. So there's two, when you think of NAD, I know people, we want to take things because we want to feel better, right? And
Mhm.
Qualia, we think of it as a felt brand. But the main reasons, if you talk to like Charles Brenner, who's the guy that pioneered nicotinamide riboside, the NR, and asked him like, okay, why would you take an NAD booster? He would say, and I know this because I've interviewed him, is that it's about helping cells respond better to metabolic and other stressors. That if if cells have enough NAD plus, they're resilient. That same stress that may cause them to be a zombie cell if they were depleted in NAD will now be like, I got this. I can weather this storm. So the main reason to take NAD boosters is that cellular health reason.
Okay.
It's so that our cells stay healthy and fit and can weather the storm when they get stressed. So I think of it, for me personally, don't do it because, oh, like I want to get this more energy, or I do it because I want my cells to be as resilient to stress as possible. Because just like stress in the real world that affects you and me and listeners, some of the biggest ones we didn't anticipate, right? They kind of come out of the blue. And my bias is it's the same for our cells. Like they get stressed all the time, sometimes by things that they weren't prepared for. I want my cells to be more prepared to handle stress resiliently. And so I invest in keeping their NAD levels higher for that reason,
Hmm. Interesting. And also, when like, isn't cellular health completely tied into aging?
for sure. I know back when I was a naturopathic student in the early to mid 90s, and what I thought of as the time as, the old timers, the mentors, that generation of naturopaths were all about, the health of tissues, right?
Mhm.
Like liver, GI were two classic things. Detox was big among naturopaths back then.
Of course.
And they would have said, oh, like, your health is dependent on the health of your tissues. But now we know the health of our tissues is dependent on the health of the cells in those tissues. So
Mhm.
cellular health is health, right? If cells aren't healthy, we're not going to be healthy. And we know at a cellular level, they call it the hallmarks of aging, but there's certain characteristics that happen as we get older, within cells. So NAD levels going down, mitochondria not performing well, DNA not getting repaired adequately, and on and on. So on a cellular level, if we can keep those healthier, good things happen. I know you've heard of stem cells. I'm sure listeners, have also heard of stem cells. NAD helps stem cells stay, like stem cells are mostly quiet. They're dormant, sleeping, and then they wake up and do their job when they're needed. But when they're sleeping, they need to be, again, resilient to stress. And, NAD helps that piece as well, right? So we want, or I'm not going to say I want my cells to have all the resources they need to stay as healthy as they can, because, my health depends on them.
Hmm. So let's go back to methylation for a second.
Yeah. Yeah. So, methylation, I think it's widely oversimplified in our world. Understandable, right? Most things are nuanced. But methylation just means adding a methyl group onto molecules, and that's involved in a lot of things. Some neurotransmitters need to have that methylation. I mentioned earlier, for people that may remember, that when we have excess amount of some of the NAD boosters, or when the NAD molecule gets broken down, the way we manage the excess is methylating it. And then that allows it to be more readily eliminated in urine. And methylation is something called the methyl cycle. So vitamins like folic acid, or not folic, we'll just say folates, B12, B6, a little bit B2, something called betaine, also called trimethylglycine. They're all involved in the methyl cycle. And then things like glycine and creatine are all spun off from the methyl cycle. They're built using methyl groups as part of it.
Right.
Betaine, the other name for is trimethylglycine, right? So three methyl groups, right, tied onto a glycine molecule.
Right.
And so the reason I think that one particular piece of biochemistry is something you hear about on podcasts and the blogosphere and social media is because um, one part of it, and that has to do with the folate cycle, is under genetic what they would call a polymorphism, meaning there's variants of that gene in the human population. And some people have a variant that one part of that folate cycle is slightly less robust. Their gene just isn't quite as active.
Okay.
And I often see it almost portrayed as it's all or none. Like, oh, I have this like gene, I can't make folic acid into, these like the methylfolate form, right? And that's not what it means. It just means the flux through that is
Mhm.
is slower, right? It's
Yeah.
a potentially more of a bottleneck for that person, right? And so the way I like, I think it's William Walsh. Um, Long ago, he worked a lot with severe psychiatric issues, and he used the idea of under and over methylators, right? So not like, on or off, but like some people do, like skew in one direction, some people skew in another. And what he would have seen in a nutritional sense is if someone was an under methylator, they would need certain, like more of certain things to manage, these again, severe mentally
Yeah.
disturbed people. And if conversely they were what he would have thought is over methylated, they needed almost a different portfolio of nutrients. And B3, niacinamide, right, that makes NAD, would have been
Yeah.
something, if I remember correctly, he would have used a lot more of that in what he termed over methylators and
Mm.
less of it in under methylators, which I could have it backwards. But anyways, there's been that tie-in, right? That for people with severe mood issues, sometimes certain B vitamins, certain minerals may make them worse, and another collection may make them better. For most listeners, you, me, that's not us, right? We're not that degree of over or under methylators. Even when we have the genetic polymorphism that's usually labeled, which I do, believe it or not, it sometimes doesn't show up at all and impact us at all, right? So I think one of the reasons that in the Qualia NAD plus we have the full B complex is because I mentioned earlier, like the
Helps with
B12,
methylation.
the active folates, the B6, like these things are all important for making the flow through that methyl cycle happen well.
I love that. And that's where you're using synergistic ingredients that help it work even better.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and that's why you're the master formulator.
Yeah, I don't know, Master. I always think like biochemistry, like these things complement each other, right? And so, we want to make sure I like my simple story when I was in practice of, what my role was nutritionally, at least, I did a lot of mind body things, and I still love that end. But even then, some apply. But in general, I viewed my role as, okay, like I need to get this person more resources, because the resources they have, if they were sufficient, it would be working better for them.
Yeah.
And I need to help them remove whatever obstacles are in the way of using those resources better.
Mm.
And it's one of the guiding things of Qualia products, right? Like you'll often see like our products are not your, typical one or two ingredient things. Like
Yeah.
they're rich in a variety of resources, because my bias is most of us need that approach.
So I know that you have, is it Niagen, the branded ingredient that you're using in NAD plus? I'm very familiar with Niagen. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Niagen is a form of nicotinamide riboside, so NR. It's been the by far the most widely used type of NR in animal and human research. It's also under patent, which for listeners just means that they've the way that they make it, it's a crystalline and it's really stable. They've patented, so no other company, a supplier would be who like Qualia would buy from, can make an NR crystalline, a really good stable form, without infringing on their patent. And I know I could buy cheaper NR from China and other countries that would be infringing on the patent, that would be a less good NR. So we know, just because of the research on the Niagen, that form really works. And at the end of the day, Chromadex is the company. It's a publicly traded company, actually. I think it still is. They're the ones that own Niagen, and then they sell it themselves under the branding True Niagen. It's the same. It's still using the Niagen, that trademark molecule. They recently shared results. I think was it, I want to say it was 85 products on Amazon that claim to have NR in them. They had all of them sent to a lab and analyzed them to see if they actually did have NR. And I think only 5 or 6 met label claim, meaning they had the amount of NR that they said they had. One of them was obviously theirs, True Niagen. Um, Thorns was another one. And Thorn doesn't use Niagen; they use a different form of NR, but it was like theirs is legit. Um, I think they said every soft gel, liposomal, like non like hard capsule form didn't was most of them had like essentially no NR in
You
them.
have to be like, that's why I'm always very careful about really, I love branded ingredients. Like I love branded ingredients. I love that there's research behind branded ingredients. Like for us, branded ingredients are big or what we talk about. So I like that you're using a branded ingredients, Niagen being that branded ingredient. So to me, that's a big thumbs up for that.
Yeah, it's they've been a good partner. We did both of our placebo-controlled studies using the finger stick kit that they've developed for it's health professionals, I think, is the only ones that they sell it to currently. So they've been a really good partner.
I love
And like you, I tend to think the worst investment is when you spend money for something that doesn't do what it's supposed to do.
And that's why third party testing is so important. That's why, like, yeah, so I'm happy to hear that Qualia has the same values that we do. Like at the end of
Good.
the day, that's important to us. We talk about branded ingredients, we talk about making sure what's in the label, what's on the label is in the product itself. Like all of that is super important. And that's why knowing who you're buying your supplements from is so critical, in my opinion. So
Yeah, and then I think that part crazy important, but then the next step, like, did the product do what it was supposed to do,
yeah.
right? So one thing, like we've done both like my N of one studies, like me and 2 other biohackers, like were my original guinea pigs. Then we did a non-placebo study measuring NAD levels. And then since then we've done 2 placebo studies. So we in the first one, I think the average increase was 74% over 28
It's
days. And the
still
second,
really high.
yeah, the second one was 67%.
Wow.
So it would seem like obvious, like oh, like someone has an NAD booster, they've probably measured it and NAD went up, right? And the answer is no.
Mhm.
Like where as far as I know, the only brand that has an NAD booster that's done studies comparing theirs to placebo.
Amazing. Is there anything else, Greg, that you want to share before we end today's interview that we didn't cover? I know we covered a lot of ground, but is there anything that you feel like you didn't say about NAD plus that you'd like to?
Yeah, the last thing I would say is that we also looked at subjective symptoms. We did a questionnaire in the placebo, and the last one we did, we used a what we would think of as an aging male and aging female symptom questionnaires, and particularly in the women, the that symptom scale you can think of three clusterings of symptoms. One would be like mental, emotional, like the mood things we talked about, brain foggy things. One would be physical symptoms, aches, pains, discomfort, things like that. And one would be libido types. And we didn't see any change in the libido category compared to placebo, but the other two we did, and especially prominent in the women that were in our study. So, when you take, NAD boosters, whether it's Qualia's or one of the other ones, again, make sure you try to buy from a really reputable company, pay attention to those. Like that's what we've seen the most commonly is that, especially, energy, mood, kind of what we talked about with the 3Ds, but also, pay attention to skin and GI performance. And our the other forms of bees are as important for our gut microbiome as they are for us. Like they can't make them either, so they rely on us to get enough in our diet for them.
And is this something you take every day, every second day? Like I know, yeah, so I want to understand exactly if
Yeah,
can it be something that you could take every second day? Like, does it have to be something you take every day? Is it one of those things that like in order to help your cells, does it have to be consistently on a daily basis?
yeah. I I think there's an analogy I use called the edge of chaos. I didn't create it. It's from complexity science. But the idea is that a healthy system has the right amount of order and disorder, right? It's kind of a knife edge. And so heart rate variability would be a complex systems science thing. You look at that if you were doing, it's going to look like the stock market if you did it moment to moment, right? Your HRV is going to have that signature.
Yeah.
Yep. And that would be what's called a nonlinear system. And then you have other things like cortisol or melatonin that have like a really beautiful rhythm when someone's healthy, right? Cortisol, it's more like a sine wave, like a musical note.
Yeah.
And so physiology, when we're healthiest, like certain things are more like HRV and certain things are more like a musical note. And so I think the best way to support that is having the right amount of order in certain things and the right amount of variability in others. So meal timing and when we go to sleep, without question, the more regular we are on those, the more beautiful our, hormones have for musical note signatures. For other things, like with exercise, we probably don't want to just do the same thing every day, right? We want to create some variability over time. And with supplements, I think you can make a case for doing things intermittently. We do a lot of that at Qualia, right? Like Qualia Mind, we recommend 5 days on, two off. Qualia NAD, just our default is just take it every day, but take it in the
Mhm.
morning. I think we won't go into a lot of this, but I think there's good reasons in animal studies to think that NAD boosters work way better for metabolic health when we take them at the beginning of our day than if we
Mhm.
take them at the end. Um, and some of a huge amount of what our brain and cells do is predicting the future, right? So like I remember thinking when I was young and in the Navy and going to the gym all the time with guys that were a lot bigger and stronger than me, thinking like if I just lift more weights, I'll get bigger. But we don't really get bigger and stronger because we lifted weights as much as we get bigger and stronger because our muscle says, "Oh, Greg may be lifting these things in the future. Better be more prepared next time." Right? Like that's why adaptation comes in. And with if as an example, whether it's a magnesium supplement or maybe Qualia NAD plus, if our system learns that every day at 7 in the morning, Greg is going to get this, surge of NAD, then cells can be prepared for that and I think use it better. Where if
Mhm.
it's herky jerky, we do it today, we don't do it for a couple of days, we do it then 4 days in a row, then it's a little more confusing for them,
Mhm.
right? So I went on a long, drawn out thing, but I think in a general case, we want to do, if we're going to be supplementing something like a magnesium or NAD boosters,
Okay.
most days do it about the same time in the
Yeah.
same kind of context so that learning can happen.
Yeah.
Other things like I think it's then always useful to take a break for something. Like I would think of deloading in an exercise sense, right? We want to have a week, maybe every 8 weeks, where we just take a break and either do way less or just say, no, I'm gonna not lift weights this week. So I personally do the same with supplements. So even the quality of supplements that I rely on, maybe once a quarter, I'll take a week off,
Mhm.
minimum from everything just to give my system like a break and deload it and then redo it. And I think that gives the best long term because our body's super smart and good at adapting to things. So we want to be mostly consistent, but periodically take breaks from what we do so that we can then like almost restart the clock to get benefits again.
I like that. And also, if you're, if you don't want to go off everything, because especially our community, a lot of women are taking things to prevent hot flashes or to minimize night sweat. So you can also do things intermittently, like in the sense of like maybe 1 week, take a break from one of your supplements and then kind of do that, like take different turns, I guess, with different ingredients so that you're not like freaking. Like I know for me, I'm thinking if I were to stop, let's say, taking something that I know helps my hot flashes, that would cause so much stress for me. I'm like, no,
Mm.
but like taking more than just one supplement, you're taking different ones, you can do them intermittently, right? You don't have to do them all at once and stop everything
Correct.
at once because
Yeah. And that's what I do. I rotate certain things in, rotate others out. Every
yeah,
once in a while, I'll even do a double dose of something,
yeah,
usually for a brief thing, just so that, or I'm going to really challenge my body this week with more of this. And, I know it has it. So, the
yeah.
other thing I mentioned earlier, I'm a big mind body person. So when I do things like, like if I'm taking mitochondria nutrients, I'll like self-talk, like, oh, mitochondria, like I'm giving this to you, do the best with it.
I talk to my body all the time. I could think I'm crazy, but I do. And in a positive way. I try to do it in a positive way too. So I actually like that.
Good.
From the same mindset. Well, thank you so much, Greg, for coming back, and thank you for explaining Qualia NAD Plus. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dr. Greg Kelly today. If you did, please share it because the more you share shows you care. And if you want to help to boost your NAD plus levels by 67%, which is what Dr. Greg Kelly was saying they saw in the research, you can go to qualialife.com for up to half off your first purchase and use code Morphus at checkout for an additional 15% off. That's qualialife.com for an extra 15% off your purchase. And I want to thank Qualia Life for sponsoring today's episode. Thank you for spending the last little bit with me. I know there's a lot you could be doing, but instead you chose to spend your time with me, and for that I am grateful. I'll see you at the next interview.